Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome. Welcome to our talk. This is the first time that I'm doing this from the Substack. Usually when I do the podcast, I go live from my Facebook page, and I thought today I would do it from here and see how it felt. So that's why this mic is here. If you're joining me live and you can see me, some people just listen to the podcast later, so they never see the big mic, but that is what's going on. Happy Valentine's Day. And today, the topic that I wanted to kind of dive into is saying the true things out loud. And that's what I was writing about this week. And it's a topic that really has all these sort of different, I feel like it's one of those things that we could talk about for hours. We're not going to do that. But I think we're at this moment in time where for a lot of people, just naming things, calling things what they are can be really grounding. It's in this country, like if you're in the United States, just being able to say what is happening in our government right now is unhinged and, so far outside the rule of law, unconstitutional, all these things, just being able to name that can be a way of grounding yourself, and hearing other people saying that can also be, it's so dizzying right now because there are people walking around kind of like just living their lives like everything's normal. There are people who are celebrating what's happening. And then there are those of us holding our heads in our hands in absolute, dismay, despair, horror. So it's a strange time to be here in this country. I think it's a strange time to be alive. And then there's also kind of like the personal, like where you come at this personally. And for those of us who grew up in households where it was not so easy to say the true things out loud, it can be really difficult also. And I certainly understand what that is. I was writing this week about that. I had a number of experiences when I was really little that I think taught me to hold things in. And very briefly, I'll tell you, because I think most of these things for people are universal. My stuff is mine. You have your things, whatever our histories are, they are. But I think that for a lot of people, sometimes just saying things, naming things can be really scary. It makes you feel vulnerable. And you might not have felt safe to do that in your family of origin or even in the culture at large. And I want to get into that too, especially for girls and women. I think the messaging is pretty intense in that regard. So the very brief sort of origin story is like the first few years of my life, I think were actually really kind of ideal. My parents were together, and my maternal grandmother was somebody we saw every day. My mom and my maternal grandmother, I called her Nanny. They were best friends, and we saw her every day of my life. We were in Manhattan in New York City, and she lived in Jersey City, and she would come in every day or we would go there. And right before I turned 4, the week before my 4th birthday, she died. She had breast cancer, and she had been sick for that whole year leading up to her death. And I think that my mom and my dad were having a lot of difficulty in their marriage. My dad was seeing multiple women on the side, which is something he continued to do and had already done before he met her. It was not new. So she had discovered that. My mother had discovered that when I was 3 months old. And so for that year leading up to my grandmother's death, they were keeping up appearances. My mother did not want her mother to know that their marriage was on the rocks. And so basically what happened is my grandmother died. I have very vivid memories of that last day of her life. I was not allowed in the hospital room. I was too little. And then the next week, my dad left. So I got up one day and found my mother in our dining room, sitting there by herself in the dark, hadn't turned the lights on. And my mother was not somebody to sit in a room. So it really scared me, even at that age, to just see her. She was always moving. She was always cleaning or doing, or, and she told me my dad was not going to live with us anymore. He was going to have his own apartment. And once he was set up, I would be going back and forth. My home was with her, but I would be visiting him. And then not that later that day, she took me to a friend's house who had a farm, somebody I had not met before, outside New York City, and left me there for, I do not know how long. Definitely at least a week, but I mean, it might have been longer. And my mother was someone you couldn't talk to about this kind of thing. So I could never ask her later in life, like, hey, Mom, like, how long was I at that farm? And who was that person? That was not something that that wasn't a conversation she was going to have. But essentially what happened is everyone I knew disappeared just all at once. And I remember being on the farm and not knowing where anyone was, and knowing that I did not know how to reach anyone, if I was ever going to see anybody again. I was sobbing when my mother left, begging her not to leave, promising her I would, be good, because she said she just needed rest. And she probably really did. And I want to touch on that for a second too. My mother, because in the essay that I wrote, if you just read that essay, was definitely not a shining moment for my mom. And I'll talk about that story in a second. But, my mother had a lot of trauma in her life early. Her dad died when she was 13. And then her mother died when she had me when she was 24. She and my dad had an affair. He was 20 years older. And so I imagine there was some element of, you don't have to be like an armchair psychologist. Her dad died when she was 13, and she fell in love with a man who was 20 years older. I'm sure there was something in that of having an older man there. I think my dad was the love of her life. And when that marriage ended, I think something kind of like really broke in my mother that did not ever heal again. And I think some part of her emotional growth kind of stopped at 13 when her dad died. When I was able to relate to my mother like I was relating to a 13-year-old girl, things went better. If I could kind of remember that, it went better. And so that happened. And then her mother died and my dad left. And then my uncle died when I was 17. So her whole family of origin died very young. It was all sudden. I mean, her mother was sick for a year, but the first 6 months, it was just a cold that she couldn't shake. And then it wasn't until that last stretch that they understood she had cancer. So I think what happened for her is she learned people can just disappear and being vulnerable is not safe. And so she was very controlled. My mother, she's a very controlling person. Most controlling people, that's what it's coming from. They've been hurt and they are trying to avoid getting hurt again. And so I think, knowing that helps. if there's one thing that I can look back on and really I wish that she would have gotten some help. And that was her downfall in every direction, is she would never admit that she needed help. And she really did. And so what I was writing about is after I had come back, she did obviously go and pick me up from the farm at some point, and we went back into the city. And I think this was before my dad had set himself up in a new apartment. I didn't see my dad, I think it was like 6 months after they split. It took a while. And so they had a very acrimonious divorce. And so I think it was in that moment where, we had come back, and that rhythm of going back and forth had not begun yet. And it was just kind of like the two of us. And I don't remember what happened. I just remember that something happened, and I was really upset, and I was crying. And I said I wanted my nanny, my grandma. And my mother got very angry and said, "You can't have her. She's dead," which obviously was not kind, but I think she probably wanted her mother too, So I think some of her cold, one of the things that I'm writing a memoir, and so much of it is about my relationship with my mother, but also like the cultural, societal part of what it has been happening with women, and now, of course, like what is continuing to happen, and all of that, the rage that is being passed down from generation to generation. And I think part of what happened with my mother is that she had worked so hard to make everything look right on the outside. My mother happened to be a beautiful woman, and she was always put together. She walked out the door, hair's done, makeup's done, like perfume, jewelry, the handbag matches the shoes, whatever. She was just like, my mother did not own jeans. She didn't own sweats. When she would visit me, she was always trying to get me to like straighten my hair. She just she did not like to sweat. So she was very controlled. And I think that when I was little like that, I don't know when the last time was that you spent time with a 3, 4, 5-year-old, it's like we come into this world and we're just like, we're all emotion, right? Like, it's like you can be the most joyful, and then 2 seconds later you can be just sobbing. And I mean, there are those blogs, right? Why is my toddler crying? Because his sleeve is touching his wrist. I mean, it's just, those things exist for a reason, because they're true. And so I think in a way, this sort of like wild emotion that I was expressing probably was like the embodiment of all of her repressed emotion, that in a way I'm like this like tiny version of her, looking up at her, reflecting back all of this, I'm sure, need that she felt in her own self that she was rejecting. Or maybe I'm just making that up to make myself feel better, which is also possible. But I don't think so. I really, on an intuitive level, feel like that is a big part of what was going on in our relationship, because there were times where she was just incredibly cruel. And this thing that I was writing about this week was one of those times. So I was upset, I was crying, and I said I wanted my nanny, and she said, "You can't have her, she's dead." And I said, "Well, then I want my Aunt Louise." And my Aunt Louise is my uncle's wife, and also in New Jersey. And so my mother's side of the family, New Jersey Italians, like super affectionate, loving. And those are, I grew up with them. Like my first 4, 5 years was a lot of time with my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my 4 cousins. When my parents split, I think my mother was embarrassed and ashamed to have she's going through this divorce, and also like there was already this shame of having had an affair with a married man in the first place, being with someone 20 years older. I think her family had really kind of like encouraged her not to do that, and then it didn't work out. So I think there was a lot of that in the mix as well. So for the first 6 months or so after my dad left, she wasn't leaning on my aunt, uncle in the way that I wish she had, because if she had left me there, all would have been well. I was so comfortable there. They just, I would walk in and they couldn't like hug, kiss, whatever, they were all over me. But that's not what happened. So anyway, I said, well, then I want Aunt Louise. And I think that the fact that I needed something she wasn't giving me, right? Clearly, I needed something, some kind of comfort or affection. My mother was not affectionate with me. She was not a hugger. She would not like wrap me up and, put me in her lap or kiss me, or she just wasn't that person. I think it must have enraged her because she grabbed my suitcase out of my closet and she started yanking my drawers open and just like, I'm getting emotional because I feel bad for her, not me, which is, but she started just pulling all my stuff out and throwing it into this suitcase, and it scared me. And I tried to pull things back out. I started apologizing to her, saying I was sorry and I would be good. And, I didn't mean it. It was, I didn't want to go anywhere. And I was trying to pull my clothes out and she wouldn't let me. And so she took all my stuff out, put it in the suitcase, zipped it up, grabbed me by the wrist and marched me through the apartment and put me outside our back door, and slammed the door. And so I was out in the stairwell, outside our kitchen, our back door was through the kitchen. And I mean, just bawling and, pounding on the door with my little fists and begging her to let me back in, and thinking, you're 5. You don't have the like rational, of course she's going to let me in, like that's not what's going on. You think that's it. Like she doesn't love me anymore. I upset her. I'm out. Like she's just put me out. And so I was out there for 45 minutes, and I know that it was 45 minutes because our neighbor from across the hall, this woman Ula, who was 6'3", she finally opened her door, and she came out and she said, "What is going on?" And I said, my mom is really upset with me. She's put me outside. She's not letting me back in. And so Ula banged on the door, and my mother came very quickly. So my mom was always very worried about what other people thought. And that door flew open, and Ula said to her, 45 minutes is too long to punish a 5-year-old this way. She was very, very upset. And my mother pulled me in, and said something to her about trying to teach me a lesson or something. And that was that, went back into the house. And then I obviously learned like saying that I needed anything was not going to be okay. Telling my mother that I wanted my nanny or my Aunt Louise or some love or being upset even, being angry, being sad, like those things were not going to be tolerated. That's what stays with you, that if you express that, you're going to be put out with the trash and love will be withdrawn. And I had similar, experiences, unfortunately, with my dad for other reasons where, and I'll share this like one other story, but, my dad came eventually, I did start going back and forth, and my dad came to pick me up once, and they would fight at the he always came to get me. She never went to my dad's, only one time, and that was because I was in a lot of trouble. But other than that, he was always the one coming to get me and drop me off. And so he came to get me. They had a very unpleasant interaction in the kitchen, which I heard. And my mom would not, when that would happen, she wouldn't even look at me. Like, I would leave with my dad. She wouldn't even, like, give me a hug, or like, I would just leave, and I wouldn't see her for 3 or 4 days, depending on the schedule. So I remember that feeling in my stomach of just hating to leave her. I really didn't. I wanted my mother. Like, that's what I want. I wanted her. I wanted her love. I wanted her attention. I wanted some security with her, and I just could never get it. And so we left, and my dad was always talking to me about like his problems. And so we hit the street, and I was incredibly worried about my mother. Like, is she upset up there? Is she going to be okay? The fact that I was not going to see her, and I didn't know, is it like 3 days or 4 this week? I couldn't remember. Just all of it, just the like pain of having to leave her and not, and I couldn't call her from my dad's house because that would upset the woman who became my stepmom, who was his girlfriend. He'd moved right in with his girlfriend. And so it just was not great. And so we're walking to this there's a nut candy store between my mom's and my dad's. We would pass, and it was sort of like this ritual that we would stop there, and he would get a small bag of roasted salted cashews, and I would get a small bag of red Swedish fish. So the whole time we're walking from my mom's building to the candy store, which is 4 blocks, 5 blocks, he's talking about this woman, that woman, how we're going to go visit this one tomorrow after school, and we're not going to tell the girlfriend because it'll upset her, even though he's not doing anything wrong. And if only these women could share, everything would be great, whatever. And he's not realizing that I'm like not okay, and I am just trying to not cry. That's like where I'm at. I'm just trying to not cry. And so we get to the candy store, and I can't do it. I couldn't hold it in. And so I just started bawling. Like, I couldn't go into the store and manage to like talk to the salesperson and order my Swedish. I just knew I wasn't gonna be able to do it. And he was like shocked and said, "What's the matter?" And I just said, "I wish I had never been born." So I was 6 at this point. And my dad got down in front of me. He turned purple and he yelled at me. He's like, "Don't ever, ever say that." And my experience of that was that he was angry. And so I immediately tried to take it back and make him feel better. And just swallow that feeling. Now, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. If your 6-year-old busts out with, "I wish I had never been born," I mean, like, that is serious. That's not a small moment in the day. That is a moment to really stop everything and figure out what is going wrong. What kind of support does my child need? What kind of support does this family system, like, something is going very wrong here that needs to be dealt with. But in the immediate moment, you get down at eye level and you say, like, "Honey, like, what do you mean?" Like, "What do you mean? Like, what's happening? Talk to me." Like, that's what you do, but that's not what happened. So the message for me from my mom and my dad, and those were like major examples, and they happened very quickly, right? Like from like 4, 5, 6, which is just like incredibly formative, personality forming moments. And that all continued because those are big examples, but then there were smaller ones too, where it's just like, there wasn't any space for me to be angry or sad or difficult. Like my job was to be helpful, to listen, to be kind, to be polite, to be generous. I could be happy, that was fine. But angry or sad or anything that was going to cause the adults around me to have to stop what they were doing was not okay. So what do you do with that stuff, right? Like where does that go? What do you do? It's not like you're a robot. So you learn to push it down. And my mom, as I got older, started to drink. And that is no surprise because when she herself was not dealing with her giant feelings, and that rage would come out even when she was sober. There were times where she would just go for my jugular, and it was so painful. It really would take my breath away. And it was obviously, maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but when people drink, it loosens whatever their tendencies are. So that was not good for us. And that started when I was 7 and really kind of like went into full bloom when I was 8, the drinking. And that didn't stop. That did not stop until for the rest of time until the last year of her life. And then she got ALS and she couldn't drink anymore. She couldn't swallow anymore. So that's another story for another day. But that was the messaging, was like those messy feelings, or your rage, your anger, your, whatever, like anything like that you need to either edit that out, or you manage that, or you repress that, or whatever it is. So that's what I did. And with my mom, it was scary. Like there wasn't any question about whether I was going to do that or not, because when she drank, she would come after me, like it wasn't pretty. So there wasn't going to be any sort of like testing that boundary where like I just spent my childhood trying to figure out how to help and how to keep secrets. No, we did not talk about her drinking. She would not talk about it, even just one-on-one. As I got older, when I would say, I'm worried about you, like I really concerned. You're drinking like most nights, and you're getting to the point where you can't walk in a straight line. You're slurring. Your whole personality changes. Like, I'm worried. And it was like, I don't have a problem. There is no problem. You're the one with the problem. It's very like, we are not doing this. I don't have an issue. You are sensitive. And that is, and everyone around her backed that up. So all the adults around my mom, when that was the narrative, that I was sensitive and dramatic. They called me Sarah Bernhardt. And my mom was a social drinker, and there was no problem. Now, of course, most of those people did not go home with us and see what was going on. There were some people, obviously, who did, but not most. And so, and I was not going to betray my mother and talk about that stuff. So that is crazy making, right? When you're in a situation and you're growing up and you're like, I don't think this can be right. My mom's like coming after me physically, verbally, emotionally. And I know that I'm doing everything possible to be good, right? Like, I'm getting straight A's. I'm starving myself. I'm taking care of my little brother. I'm making sure the house is clean. I'm like doing all this stuff. And no matter what I do, it's like not enough. And it really seems like she's drinking way more than anybody, it can't be healthy, it can't be okay. And everyone's telling you it's you, not her. It's like you don't trust yourself. You're like, okay, well, if every adult in my life that's seeing this is telling me it's me and not her, like maybe it's me. It's you don't know, right? Especially I'm talking about you're like 10, 11, 12, you're not sure. So not until I got to be like 13 did I start to feel like, no, this is not, this is not me. Like there's a problem going on here. And I can see, because now I'm like going to friends' houses and really seeing how other people are living and sleeping over. And, just I'm aware of what social norms are more, and I'm talking to my friends more. I have, friends that I feel close enough to that I could finally say, hey, does your mom drink a lot? Like, I'm able to have those conversations now and put things in a broader context. It wasn't until then that I started to really understand. And also that it was the alcohol. It became very clear to me it was the alcohol that was causing a lot of these issues. You don't know that when you're 8 or 9, it's not obvious to you. So, when you come out of that kind of childhood, and obviously we didn't all come out of that exact childhood, but when you're coming out of that sort of, environment where, and a lot of us who were children in the 70s, teenagers in the 80s, just like, it was a different, just generally speaking, like things were different. We laugh a lot, Gen X, like, that we were feral. It's like we went out and I was going around New York City by myself from the time I was 8 years old. I was packing my own lunch and getting on the public transportation and getting to school. And I was not alone in that. So a lot of my friends, same. And so there was some of that too. And then there was also like, I grew up both households, my mom's and my dad's, very gender, it's like traditional gender, just all of that, like really painful messaging. Girls are this way. You need to be sweet and kind and generous and giving, and that's your job. And your value is like in how you look, and you need to get good grades and all of that. And it was just all that stuff going on. And then like what you get when you go to school, and you're seeing, just the way things are different. And they just absolutely were, like boys would go running through the hallway or running into the classroom, and the amount of slack given, and the amount of space that I think, certainly as I was growing up, boys just walk into a room and take up space, and it was not the same for the girls. It's like, you're going to be quiet and do your work. And sometimes be tasked with keeping like the boy next to you caught up and in line. It was just a different time. But when you're getting that messaging from the world around you as well, and then I had other things that happened as well, where I had like male teachers in my school who were completely inappropriate. And instead of getting any support from the male, for example, like head of the history department in my high school, he called me into his office and said I was wreaking havoc in his history department. And meanwhile, one of his history teachers was sending love letters to my house. I didn't want anything to do with this man. He was married. I had no interest. There was zero there. And so it's like you're being blamed for this horrific behavior of grown men. Like, it's your fault, So there's just like all of this stuff that you're trying to make sense of, and there really isn't anywhere to put it. Any safe place to talk about it. So for me, there's all of that, and for people that, there are other areas where this comes up. If you have like a really strict religious upbringing, or, just where you're dealing with like a really strict parent rageaholic, whatever it is. There's a lot of different scenarios where you might not have felt comfortable to just speak your mind or to say how you feel. And for me, this has been like a lifelong, like this is my work, right? Is to be able to trust myself and trust my ability to discern, to discern reality, to know that like if I am seeing something or experiencing something, I can trust that, right? I can trust my own perception and know that like, it's what I'm feeling is valid, or if I want something, being able to own that, or if I'm trying to put a value on something that I'm offering. All these things have always been incredibly difficult for me. It was like ingrained in me to be generous, to be kind, to put other people first, to think about how other people were going to feel and to put those feelings ahead of my own, but also survival, right? Like if you express yourself too passionately, you might be put out in the hallway with the door shut in your face. So some of it is that too, like being afraid to poke the bear. And there's that, Carl Jung has this great quote that was one of those, the first time I heard, it's like, my brain exploded. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So just this idea of like, okay, I need to understand myself in order to, I need to look at this stuff, right? I need to figure out what has happened in my life that has caused me to have the feelings that I have and to struggle with the things that I'm struggling with. And I can't fix it or shift it if I can't even name it. If I can't even like bring it up into the light, and kind of like look at it clearly. And I think because I had so much, there just was no tolerance for that growing up. When I started doing that kind of work, when I got out of those houses and I skipped my senior year of high school and I went right to college, it almost felt like an act of rebellion, right? To be able to just name things. And the one place that I had always done it, even when I was in those households, was in my writing, right? I had always had like journals where I was writing, where I was saying the true things out loud, even though I would hide those journals. Like the thought of my mother finding a journal of mine, it was like taking my life in my hands to write that stuff down. Because it would not have been okay for her to, I was not allowed to criticize her in any way. I was not allowed to, ask questions, or there was zero tolerance for that. But that's where I could do it. It's just like write things down, get them out of my head and like onto a piece of paper. And even so, I still, as a teenager, I was struggling with migraines. That's when the migraine started. Disordered eating, body dysmorphia, like it was just all of that stuff that happens when you're like trying to wrestle with all of these big feelings and you have nowhere to put them. And you don't feel comfortable taking up space or saying how you feel or saying what you think or asking for something, this whole thing of like asking for what you want. There's no room to do that when you're in these kinds of households. You're not asking for what you want. You're paying attention to what is going on around you, trying to keep yourself safe. You're not even thinking about what do I want? Like that's not even, what you want is to not die. What you want is to not end up in the hallway with your suitcase. That's what you want. You're like trying to survive. So there isn't any like, oh, I'd love to like curl up on the couch with a book. That would bring me a lot of joy. Like you're not, there isn't that. Or, oh, I'd love to go to Central Park today. Like, you're not thinking like that. And when you don't have those neural pathways, you go out into the world as an adult, you don't have those neural pathways. So you're not entering friendships, relationships, even just a day by yourself. You're not thinking like that. You're thinking about like, what do I need to do? And how do I help? And who can I, what do I do to make myself safe? What can I do? And so it took me a really long time to understand that's what was going on, and was happening in my friendships, and all my relationships were so much about, how do I keep myself safe here? Who do I need to be and how do I need to be in order to, I didn't want to be left, that whole like fear of abandonment thing. Everyone in my life disappearing, just poof, right? Just gone. And I'm at a farm, like with no way to reach anyone. How do I avoid that? And when you're entering relationships that way, how can I not be left? Then your motivation, it's like, who do I need to be to become instrumental to this person so that their life is better with me in it, and then they won't leave? Like, that's not, that's very different than, I know who I am, I know I've been through some stuff. I like who I am, I know I'm doing my best to be a good human being in this world. And I know that I'm bringing a lot to the table. And so if I'm going to spend time with someone, I really only want to do that if they're going to raise the joy quotient in my life, which, already exists. Like, that's so different. Those are two completely different animals. And so, you end up repeating patterns, right? And that's a big thing. And you find that everywhere. So like Albert Einstein definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Or the repetition compulsion, Freud. This guy had some opium and other serious issues, but also some good things. You don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say, right? So, this idea of the pleasure principle overriding. I'm sorry, scratch that. I think it was like 1917. He was doing these studies, finding that his patients were more compelled to repeat patterns from childhood, trying to gain mastery over things they did not gain mastery over as children, than they were to pursue the pleasure principle. So they were like more inclined to keep chasing people who were unavailable than they were to, go be with somebody who was available, if that's something that they dealt with growing up. And so like, you see it across many different schools of thought, and in yoga, like samskaras, it's like repeated action, joined action. There are these grooves, like you're doing this thing and it's like you do this thing and you get this result. So it's you creating these emotional grooves that you repeat, and you can just fall into that really easily. And so knowing yourself is a way of not repeating these patterns that are going to just like land you in a brick wall. And it takes time, right? You just like be vigilant. And sometimes you can I think a lot of the time what happens for people in therapy is you get to a certain point where you can identify all these triggers, but that's as far as you get, right? Like you're like, okay, so everyone disappeared when I was 4, I was at a farm. So I have like major abandonment, like fear of abandonment. Okay, so I would be punished for expressing myself, so I don't do that. Like you can name that stuff, but if that's where you get stuck, then you're just kind of stuck at like, okay, I can identify these things that are like triggering. I can identify my trauma, but is that it? Like, do these things that happened before you had any say about what happened to you, is it going to have to define you for the rest of your life? Because that would really suck, wouldn't it? So, I think that became really fascinating for me. And part of what I've been doing for the last 30 years is just trying to like figure out, okay, how do you work with this stuff and move through it? And for me, it's like been a combination of things. I don't think there's any formula. I can share like what has really helped me in my life, but like everybody, I think, has to figure out what's going to help them. For me, certainly therapy, incredibly helpful. It does help to know what these things are and to be able to name them. Writing, absolutely huge part of just like getting it out of this like cranium where it's like, but for me, I needed to like also have a somatic, like be in my body, right? And so yoga for me was like a really helpful practice and has been, and I teach. So I've been teaching for 30 years, and meditation, right? It's like quieting your mind and getting in your body and understanding that like if you have fear, then you can work with that fear on your mat. You don't have to let it stop you. You're just like, okay, whatever it might be, like everybody's got poses that are difficult. And so you can just not just, okay, well, I'm not going to do that, but just play with it and work with it. And that's how you start to like overcome this stuff, because fear is fear. Fear of abandonment, it's fear. So you're just working with your fear. So like, there are different ways to sort of move through these things, but you've got to like figure out what those are. My mom would not do that. She would not do that. She would not even admit there was anything to work through. And so I think what happened for her is I just became almost like an outward embodiment of all of these emotions that she had worked so hard to reject. And so a lot of the time she would just reject me because she couldn't handle that reflection. She just couldn't face that. And it was painful. It was really painful. So being able to talk about these things, what came up for me, and the reason that I was writing about this week is that it's my birthday tomorrow, and I'm going to be 54. I have so far, knock on wood, whatever, I have zero like aging. I'm so grateful to be here. Like that is genuinely how I feel. And I do not feel invisible. I am just, and I mention that because it's such a thing in our culture. People talk about women over 50, like, I would say don't believe the hype. Like I have not experienced that. I feel more fired up and more creatively inspired and free than I've ever felt in my life. I feel more able to say what I think without, worrying too much about what people are going to, what's going to happen. I mean, not in every area though, which is what I was writing about, but in most areas, I'm pretty like, hey, you know what? Life is too short. So I'm just going to say how I feel, and not everybody's going to like it, and I'll lose people. And I certainly have. I've been doing this a lot. Like this has been my work this is not new. This has been my work for years now. And we all know we're on different social media apps and different things that we're doing. And I've been writing for my whole life, and I have a yoga website that I started back in 2009. And at that time, this was, back when Facebook, people were on there and blogging. It was back when we blogged. And I started a business page for the site, and I was blogging there. I was just writing about sort of like yogic philosophy for the Western mind. How do you apply this practice to your daily stressful life? And I didn't really use a lot of Sanskrit. I just kind of like wrote, just wrote. And it just happened to be the right thing at the right time, genuinely. And the page grew and grew. It has 174,000 people on it. Well, it's not like that anymore, right? We all know things are really different over there now. And so now if you want, it used to be like I would write something, it would just get shared, whatever. Now it's like, if you write something, you have to pay to get your people to see it. And I'm just not doing that. And for a variety of other reasons, it's like, we're all trying to figure out where we feel comfortable right now. Everything is shifting, right? Everything is shifting. Things feel really strange, fragile, scary. And so I think we're all trying to like find our footing and figure out where we feel comfortable. I don't know if there's really a place where anyone's feeling extremely safe right now, but just where you feel like, okay, this is a place where I want to be investing like my time and energy. This community feels really good. The thing is, the community is always going to be good wherever it is. That's how I feel. It's like the community of people who want to be having this kind of conversation, whether it's my community or other communities, it's like that community is always going to be good wherever we go. Because to me, it's like the artists, the poets, the musicians, the people, the writers, the people who believe in, I don't know, just like beauty in this world and tolerance and celebration of differences and acceptance and like to me, those are always the people that I want to be with. Like, I just that's it. So I mean, wherever we go is wherever we go. But I like it. Anyone who's supporting what is going on right now, openly supporting, proudly supporting what's happening right now. I don't want to. It's like I really don't. I'm certainly not going to be supporting that with my dollars. I'll tell you, like, that's not happening. So there's that, Now, look, we're gonna have to, like, all of us figure these things out as we go, because the reality is any sort of platform that is tech oriented is probably going to be owned by people that you might not want to hang out with. That's probably the truth. And so I think we need to figure out, and I know there are people that are trying, like Blue Sky, and there are people that are trying to come up with solutions. And I'm like, great, let's do it. But until that happens, we do want to be able to gather. We do want to be able to communicate. We do want to be able to share ideas, reassure each other, reach out, in the dark here. Even just weeks ago, I'm here in Los Angeles and like Instagram, and people were sharing links left and right for like, hey, if you've been displaced by these wildfires, go here for meals, go here for clothes. I was running clothing drives. Like, it can be useful. Like they can be tools for good. So it's like, you're just going to manage a little bit where what the line is for you. It doesn't have to be the same for all of us, but, I don't think you're going to find a perfect platform anywhere. And I think when you're talking about any platform where there's any money being exchanged, you're talking about like third-party credit card processing companies. You're also, if you use a credit card, you're in that system of like, you're dealing with tech people and tech bros. Like those are the people that own those companies. So I think it's really hard to completely opt out. But you're also like in a country where you're paying taxes to some pretty crazy people. So, it's like we're in a system that is unfortunately, it's not a healthy system. And that's not new. And so I think clearly to sort of manage how you're feeling and where you want to be and what you want to do and how you want to engage, and where you can mitigate, where you can mitigate your involvement and all of that. So, but part of what happened for me this week, and what I was writing about is I've been on Substack for a little over a year now, and it's like my passion, I mean, writing is my passion. I will probably always be teaching yoga, because that to me, yoga and meditation for me are the tools that help me be the best human being I can be. And it brings me a lot of joy to share those tools because I think that they help a lot of people. I don't think it's for everybody, but it's definitely not about touching your toes. Like, it's really about if you can breathe and feel yourself breathing, you can do it. You can do it in a chair. So, I think I will always teach, and I know I'll always practice because you really wouldn't want to be around me when I'm not practicing. But writing is really where my heart is. And I'm finishing this memoir that I've been working on for a few years now, and very much about my mom, but women, and not just women either, just like those things that get passed down, beyond genes, the emotional stuff. And that's just, that's where my heart is. And so I end up spending a lot of time writing every week, a lot. And sometimes it flows, and the people who write, I'm sure you'll relate. Sometimes I sit down, like I know exactly, like, oh, there's something that's been percolating in here, and I'm gonna, I'm gonna sit down and like it just it's like a download. It just like comes out. And other times it's not like that, and I'm like, oh, it's like trying to excavate and drag through the desert and like pull yourself toward a mirage. Just like sometimes it's torturous and sometimes it's amazing, but it's always worth it. And I also have children. And I am in this world, right, where it's like you're trying to feed your kids, and they get older and they want to do things like go to college and drive cars and eat. So I have historically made not the best decisions financially and otherwise, because of all of that programming. Because of all of that, you put other people first. You need to be kind. You need to be generous. You need to all that stuff. And I really fall into that trap with men, just to be completely transparent. It's that deep, I learned at my father's knee, this is my job, right? Is to take care of men who are not okay. So that stuff is it's like in my bloodstream. It's very hard to pull myself out of that. And so because of that, I have historically not made the sort of just the unemotional decisions that people make. And I have overlooked sage sound advice because I wanted to believe this person is my friend, this person, whatever the attachment to a certain story might be. We all have our things, right? And also because when you grow up with red flags, right, there are red flags all over the place. They're normalized. You're like, oh, red flags, and I'm just getting some coffee now. Like you're not, so for a long time, I would walk by the red flags. So that took some time too. And I'm big on some lessons you're going to get early and some you're going to get after the really hard way. And as long as you get them, it's okay. And so some of them I've gotten the really hard way. It's fine. So I am really trying to shift that. This is kind of like the last part of the puzzle for me is this. Interpersonally, don't do well when when I am dealing with someone where I have to walk on eggshells. It's really hard for me for obvious reasons. If I feel like love could just be, withdrawn with no explanation or no conversation or no whatever, that's really hard for me. But sometimes you are drawn toward what you know. So for a long time, that was what would happen. I would be drawn toward people like that. And I know that about myself. And I had a friend for 10 years who, I mean, so many incredible qualities. Like I just absolutely, she was like a sister, but that was her thing. If she got upset, just like the gate would come down. And I mean, it's really painful for me, just like really, really painful. And I did talk to her, it's like, hey, that is like, of all the things, I'm pretty easy to talk to. And if you tell me that you're upset, I know how to give an apology. Like, I know how to think about something. If you tell me you're upset, I am not going to be that person that is defensive or like shuts it down. Like, I will really take it in. First of all, if I make a mistake, as you might imagine, I will beat myself up harder than you ever could. Like, if I let you down, if we are friends and I do something that hurts your feelings or upsets you, believe me when I tell you, I will put myself through the ringer in a way that you never could. And that's something I'm working on. I'm still working on that because we're all going to make mistakes. We're not going to get everything right every second of the day. It's just not realistic, but it kills me to like accidentally hurt someone. Inadvertently like do something or say something that causes someone I love any kind of pain is like my nightmare. And you know how it is. We're not all the same. So sometimes you say something that to you feels like, well, I would love it if like, I would love to hear that, like that would be I'd want to know that. I'd want to hear that. And for someone else, it could just be like they don't want to hear that, And I think that we all need to try to give ourselves a little bit of grace with that kind of thing. And I'm still working on it. When I feel like I have done something that has caused somebody pain and I don't really, it's devastating. I'm devastated. And I don't even know what to do with myself. I'm so, beside myself because it's so much. The last thing I would ever want to do is hurt someone I care about. The last thing I would ever want to do. So it's very hard for me if I know that I've done that and the person won't communicate. I just want to I don't even know what to do with. I just want to but sometimes that's life and there's just like nothing you can do. You can't make a person communicate. You can't, there's nothing you can do except say that you're sorry and hope that they'll give you some grace, to be a human being who doesn't get it right all the time. And if they won't, then they won't, and it's hard, it's painful. But that, I think what I was writing about is this whole idea of having so much anxiety about like asking for what you want. And I have not put a paywall up on my Substack, and I haven't put anything behind a paywall. I've been doing this like whatever it's been now, I think 80 weeks. I'm pretty sure Substack sent me an email. But I'm like devoting hours and hours a week to this and hours that I'm not like finishing my book. Not that I'm not finding the hours to do that too, but I'm just saying like the hours that I'm writing here, I'm not writing there. I'm not doing other things, right? So it's like, I'm really prioritizing this because I love it and because I want to do it and because I love being in conversation with this community. So it's not like there isn't all this joy in it for me. There is. It's tremendous. I've met people in the comment section that feel like family, I never would have expected that. So that's priceless, period. And I have 2 kids, right? So, and I've made historically not good. I have not taken care of myself. I have not taken care of myself financially. And I have struggled to say, I want to put, a high value on what I'm doing because I'm doing good work. It's been hard for me to say that and own it. And across the board, not just with writing, even just like teaching, leading retreats, like all of it, right? I'm always trying to just make everything okay for everybody all the time. And you can't. So I'm working on it. And so part of the way I decided, okay, there were like 3 things that I needed to do. And 2 of them involved other people. And I'm not going to get into those because some things are my story to share and some things involve other people. Not that the stories I shared didn't involve other people, but my mom isn't here anymore. And, it's how it goes. Sorry. And anyway, you know what? Thing is, like, even in the memoir that I'm writing, like, I love her so much, I miss her so much, and not hearing from her tomorrow on my birthday is still going to be weird. It'll be let's see, 21. Yeah, it'll be the 4th birthday that I don't get that phone call or see her. It's hard. Like, I really loved her with my whole heart every minute of my life, no matter how bad it got. I never didn't love her. So, and we got to a good place the last 3 weeks of her life. It's just like kind of funny is she's on her deathbed before she could finally be like, oh, okay, maybe it was the drinking. You do love me. But anyway, so I decided I was going to like run a special to see if I could just get some more paid subscriptions, right? I've got like 10,000 subscribers, but I haven't reached the 100 mark. You need 100 paying subscribers to get the little check mark on Substack. It's not about the check mark. The check mark is like whatever. It's that when you get the check mark, then they tend to like promote your Substack, your stack a little bit more because it's good for them. They're taking 10%. So it's like, it's good for them. That's why. But it would help me. So I was like, all right, this is crazy. I could just ask, right? I could just ask because there's no harm in asking. And if people can't do it, they can't do it. It's okay. So, but the amount of effort it took for me to ask was the thing that made me realize like, oh gosh, you have so much work still to do here in this area. Because I went into the dashboard. I'm like, how do I even do this? I've never done a special before. And I figured, it's very easy. They make it easy. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to set this thing to half off. So it's like $25 for the year or $250 a month. And I'm going to set that up to end at midnight on my birthday tomorrow night. So I did that. That was easy. So there's the offer. And then this thing pops up and it's like, do you want to send an email blast with this offer? And I'm like, hell no, I don't want to send it. What? No, I'm not going to like email everybody. What are you talking about? The world is on fire. I'm not going to email people with my like birthday special offer. Like, are you kidding me? The Constitution is like going up in flames right now and people are, their inboxes are like busting with, hey, can you like join this Zoom or, like, hey, can you make this phone call? Can you, join this protest? Can you get ready for this general strike? I'm not sending people my like whatever, birthday special in their inbox. That's not what people need right now. But I was like, you know what I'll do? So I'm not going to do that. So I said no to that. I'm like, I'll just write a note. I'll write a note because it's like, it's not intrusive. I could just like write a quick note, just let people know, hey, half off, whatever. Like maybe this makes it more accessible for people, whatever. It took me 4.5 hours to write a paragraph. Okay. It's like literally like a paragraph of just, hey, I'm running a special. But my anxiety of like just around asking for something that I would like is so high. My resistance, my fear of being put out in the stairwell, of upsetting someone, of just making people feel like, ugh, like that whole thing, because art is supposed to be for art's sake, right? Well, unfortunately, in my life, all the things I have been attracted to, all the things I've wanted to do, they're supposed to be for their own sake. Like teaching yoga, you're supposed to do that just because you love it and it's, it's just something you're supposed to be sharing. It's a lineage. Well, great. How do I keep the lights on in my house? How do I feed my kids? I've been devoting my life to that for 30 years. How am I supposed to eat? I mean, there comes a point where you're like, right, but I live in this society and I have to be able to provide for 2 human beings that I brought here. So, and this society does not make that so easy, as we all know. so like I gotta figure that out too. And what's wrong? Like there's no harm, there's nothing wrong with asking, or caring about that, or not wanting to worry. Like I'm tired of worrying. I have been worrying for so long. I've been working so hard for so long, and I'm sure a lot of you relate because the way we've set up the system is like, it's nuts here. It's nuts. It's like, health insurance and like co-pays and just these things that happen that are like, oh, great. I now have to, my dog got really sick this fall. I should not talk about this because I'll definitely start crying. He got cancer out of nowhere. And like, he suddenly needed a $1,500 surgery. Like, it's like, just stuff like these things happen. And, I would probably be in a different situation if I had made more, if I had made better decisions, if I had been taking care of myself in a different way all these years, I'd be in a different situation. So there's part of it that I'm upset with myself too, that like I should have taken some advice along the way about, forensic accounting and things like that I just didn't do. Because I didn't want to poke the bear and I wanted to keep the peace. All that stuff, right? All that messaging that like runs through you. And so this was like kind of part of it. But that's how long it took me, just like sweating it out, like, ugh. And like 12 people saw my note, so it's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? It's like, I don't have 5 hours to spend on a paragraph about a special. Like, it's just so ridiculous. But also like, again, trying to just like know that what's really going on there is my 5-year-old self is worrying. That's what it is, right? It's my 5-year-old standing outside the door, being afraid that like just asking for something I want is enough to make people abandon me. That's what it is. And I think that we all, on some level, right, we all have those parts of ourselves that are still in there, those hurt little kids, for whatever reason they were hurt, whatever those things are for you that happened for me, they still live in us, and they pop up every so often, usually when we're feeling like extremely vulnerable. And I think the thing is like, there's this idea in the meditation practice of like inviting your feelings in for tea. And it's, I love that. I love that idea, right? It's like whatever your feelings might be, envy or, fear or anxiety, just like invite it in. Just like, okay, let's have some tea together and kind of figure out, where is this feeling coming from? Like, what's going on here? Let me understand myself. Let me try to figure out, let me let that feeling move through me, because if I push it away, it's just going to build. It's just going to build energy and explode. But if I can just like invite it in, like, okay, let me just be with this. Let me try to understand it. Then it'll like move through me. I won't be stuck here for too long. And so that's kind of like when this happened, I was like, okay, I knew I was going to write about it. Like, as I was having this whole spiral of like this paragraph, I was like, oh, well, here's my essay topic. Like, the fact that I just am in the midst of spending like half my day on this that's it. But one of the things that I did and that I do when I find myself in that kind of headspace, and I want to wrap this up now, as much as I'm really loving spending Valentine's Day with you, and I am. I will like call myself, it's usually one of 3 things, either like chief, sport, or tiger. Those tend to work really well for me. And then I take myself a little less seriously. So I just like, okay, chief, like calm down, like just like you're going to be all right. Just like write your paragraph. Do what you need to do here. You gotta screenshot it and send it to your, do whatever you need to do. But like, just hit post. Let's move on. You're not gonna die, and you're not gonna end up outside. The idea is like to invite your 5-year-old self for tea. Like, just come on in, sit down at the table with me, or better yet, you know what? Come sit in my lap. Like, it's okay. You are having a little 5-year-old panic attack right now. Just come on in, just have a seat, and I'm just gonna wrap my arms around you, and you go ahead and do that. Like, it's fine, and we're gonna be okay, and we're gonna do it anyway. You know, we're gonna hit post on this thing, and we're gonna like get on with the day. To extend love to those parts of yourself that are just still in there and still scared and still standing outside the door, you know, like pounding away. And to trust, like, it's going to be okay. And by the way, it is more than okay. So many of you just like went and, you know, you went and took me up on it, which was like the icing on the cake. Because really, at the end of the essay, like, it's like the check mark doesn't even matter. I mean, it matters, and I appreciate it like so much. So don't take that the wrong way. But like, it's just that I managed to get through it and ask. Like, that's it, really. That's the stuff. And that discomfort when you're doing something that's not easy for you, that's where the growth is happening, you know, even though it's so uncomfortable. That's like where the growth is happening. So I hope just talking about this stuff is helpful. And I really enjoyed doing it here. I think I would definitely be down for doing this here more. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed these topics. And we'll do it again. We'll do it again real soon.